Africa has been a hotbed of conflict for the last century. As the colonial regimes of the old world withered, the shadow of the Cold War enveloped the continent. Vast natural resources were discovered and weapons proliferated, providing the means for idealists and renegades to take power for themselves. This is Untangling Africa, and in this episode, we're taking a look at the conflict in Somalia, a war that still rages to this day. This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream, a subscription service that offers thousands of documentaries and non-fiction titles from some of the world's best filmmakers, including exclusive originals. CuriosityStream is the Netflix for nerds, the Hulu for history buffs, the Disney Plus for the scientist in us. CuriosityStream is also extremely affordable at under $20 a year. That's just $1.67 per month. Being unhealthily obsessed with modern history, I naturally enjoy the in-depth and high-quality World War I and World War II documentaries CuriosityStream offers on the platform. And when I'm sick of the dark realities of modern history and war, documentaries like Going Nuts are the perfect light yet informative entertainment I like to indulge in. Available worldwide and on heaps of platforms such as your browser's web app, Roku, Android, Xbox One, smart TVs, iOS, Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Amazon Kindle, and Apple TV, CuriosityStream is the perfect tool for people on a lifelong quest to learn, explore, and understand. Go to curiositystream.com/thefront for unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and non-fiction series, and for viewers of this channel, use promo code THEFRONT to save 25% on a subscription, so click the link below or go to curiositystream.com/thefront to save 25%. Remember, that's only $14.99 a year or $1.25 a month. The Republic of Somalia was founded on July 1st, 1960, from the ex-colonial states of British Somaliland and Italian Somaliland. But just like many other newly independent African states, its borders were arbitrary. Somalis were dispersed far beyond Somalia's borders, particularly in the Ogaden region in neighboring Ethiopia to the country's west. Somalis may have been of the same ethnicity, but their separate colonial histories left them politically divided. In addition, Somali society was, and still is, largely governed by clans. Their social hierarchy is fixed and determined by one's clan allegiances. Each clan has a traditional homeland, and virtually all share the same religion, Sunni Islam. Both Somalia's borders and its government were drawn up by the British and Italians when they officially left in 1960, but they weren't to last. In 1969, the president, Rashid Ali Shamaki, was shot dead by his own bodyguard. This precipitated a military coup, and the Somali army, led by Major General Mohammed Siad Barre, seized power alongside his comrades in the Supreme Revolutionary Council. Barre's first policy dissolved the courts and binned the constitution. Barre controlled the military, but his initial grasp on Somalia was shaky. Somalis wouldn't accept his rule unless they saw a real benefit, so Barre tried to fix every issue at once. He nationalized much of Somalia's land and most of its key industries, and the revenue generated from these industries was used to roll out a massive literacy campaign. Politically, Barre combined core socialist tenets with traditional Islamic benefits to build a government aligned with the Soviet bloc. In return, he received substantial Soviet military aid. By mid-1977, Barre was on a roll. Between 1972 and 1977, literacy in Somalia had risen from a dismal 5% to a commendable 55%. Public confidence in his government was generally strong, and he had a well-trained and well-equipped army to back him up. Now was the time to take back Somalia's ancestral lands to the west and make the dream of Greater Somalia a reality. In 1977, Barre started the Ogaden War. He nearly won it too, but then the Ethiopian government convinced Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev that Ethiopia was more communist than Somalia. The Soviets responded by shifting their support to the Ethiopians, and the Somalis were hung out to dry. Barre's army was crushed and it limped back across the border, bringing with it thousands of Somali refugees from Ethiopia. By the 1980s, Barre's support base was crumbling. A third of his loyalists were dead on Ethiopian battlefields, and his war expenses had emptied the treasury. All for nothing. On top of this, Somalia was hit by the worst droughts in living memory. Named Mahanau, the drought killed thousands of livestock and kick-started a famine. As livestock exports constituted Somalia's second largest industry, the economy tanked. In the face of these insurmountable problems, Barre's government floundered. Opposition groups rose throughout Somalia to challenge his power, and the government became increasingly authoritarian. Barre sanctioned attacks and bombings against locals he believed were supporting the opposition. In the north, his forces prosecuted a genocide against the Isak, one of Somalia's major clans, reportedly killing over 200,000 people. The world was outraged, and foreign aid, the backbone of Somalia's economy since the droughts, was cut off. After this, the economy collapsed further, and unpaid soldiers deserted, often taking their equipment with them to back their clan homelands. Public institutions disintegrated without funding, and Somalia's gains since independence were reversed. With their money effectively worthless, their people slaughtered and facing widespread starvation, the clans rose up. They formed the Somali Congress, or USC, and put General Mohammed Farah Aidid in charge of its soldiers. They crushed the last remnants of the Somali army. In 1991, USC rebels took the capital Mogadishu and ousted Barre for good. Aidid declared himself president in the aftermath, and the other clans, which had definitely not agreed to that, pulled their support. Each withdrew to their homelands and consolidated. A long and bloody war was to come. Thus, in 1991, Somalia splintered. The northern region that used to be British Somaliland broke away from the non-existent central government and declared independence. To its east, the Somali Salvation Democratic Front seized control. Aidid's USC dominated Somalia's central coast but was flanked inland by the Somali National Front, which, in turn, shared borders with the Somali Patriotic Movement in the south, the Somali Democratic Movement in the center, and the Somali Africans Muke organization to the east. Some factions were well armed, some were not. Some had firm economic bases, others didn't. All, however, were starving. It was at this point that the UN decided to get involved. Talks were held with the major factions, and vague agreements were made to effect a ceasefire in the capital, which was still being fought over. The United Nations operation in Somalia 1 was launched in April 1992. Its remit was to monitor the ceasefire and provide facilities for relief agencies to import food and medicine. 50 unarmed peacekeepers were deployed to make this happen. It might have looked good on paper, but UNOSOM 1 proved a failure. 50 unarmed blue helmets weren't enough to monitor the entire city of Mogadishu, and fighting continued unabated. Troubles didn't end there for the UN though. The warlords soon realized that the peacekeepers hadn't been given a mandate to use lethal force, so they began looting their warehouses. All manner of UN supplies were stolen, including virtually all of the relief aid. By December, the UN was ready to give up. Anything they brought into Somalia was immediately stolen, and the peacekeepers couldn't walk the streets for fear of being killed. A new strategy was needed, and the United States were ready to provide it. Thoroughly embarrassed and out of options, the UN agreed. The American strategy was as simple as it was effective. They called in the Marines. On December 6, 1992, US Marines and other units made several landings around Mogadishu. They secured the airport and seaport without much of a fight and set up bases to receive reinforcements. Before long, 25,000 US military personnel and 7,000 more coalition soldiers were in Somalia. With air support and armored vehicles, they crushed any warlords who resisted and divided the country into sections, which were then locked down and cantoned. Some battles were fought, but any warlord with an inkling of sense realized that going against the full might of the US military was a bad idea. They were cowed, and within 5 months, the situation was largely stabilized. Relief aid was getting through and the humanitarian situation was improving. Wide-scale DDR programs were not undertaken, however, as US planners believed them ineffective. For the warlords, their primary deterrent was the US's overwhelming military force. UNITAF achieved its goal by March 1993. Somalia was secure, but only because 37,000 well-armed soldiers patrolled its streets, enforcing peace at gunpoint. It was then that the UN took over for a second time, reorganizing UNITAF into UNOSOM II. Some of the Yanks went home, but there were still 22,000 combat troops in country. Their objective was massively expanded too, from enforce peace and stop aid getting stolen to rebuild the entire state. Was such a lofty goal always doomed to fail? On June 5th, 1993, a Pakistani force was sent to reconnoiter an arms warehouse controlled by the warlord Ugaden, whose men killed 24 of the Pakistanis and forced the rest to retreat. The next day, the UN issued Resolution 837, declaring they would take all necessary measures against those responsible for the armed attacks and to establish the effective authority of UNOSOM II throughout Somalia. This amounted to a declaration of war on Ugaden and his militia. UN forces knew he was hiding somewhere in Mogadishu, so they relentlessly attacked targets in the city. Civilians were often caught in the crossfire, which lost UN soldiers their reputation as peacekeepers. From then on, the locals saw them as foreign occupiers. This came to a head on Bloody Monday, when 10 US attack helicopters blew up a house of Somali elders having a meeting. The Americans killed their targets, but also managed to kill 50-odd Somali priests, intellectuals, businessmen, and clan leaders. For the people of Mogadishu, the tide had turned. They felt the UN was now fighting them. The next time the Americans came, they were ready. It happened on October 3rd. 106 Delta Force operators and US Army Rangers moved into Mogadishu as part of Operation Gothic Serpent. They were after Ugaden's top lieutenants, and a series of quick helicopter insertions secured these high-value targets relatively quickly. All was going to plan until Super 61, a Black Hawk helicopter piloted by Chief Warrant Officer Walcott, was downed by an RPG-wielding militiaman. Ugaden's men closed in, and the special forces began a desperate fight for survival. Later that day, a second Black Hawk was shot down, and Mogadishu civilians set up impromptu roadblocks that effectively closed off the city. The Rangers and Delta operators were forced to dig in overnight and escape on foot the next day. It was a strategic catastrophe. The Battle of Mogadishu saw 18 Special Forces operators killed and 73 wounded. Hundreds of Somalis were killed too, and it's likely the majority of these were civilians caught in the crossfire. Tactically, the UN won, but it was their last hurrah in Somalia. The world was shocked by the violence of the so-called peacekeepers, and US President Bill Clinton pulled them out. Over the next 2 years, UN forces withdrew from Somalia. But the war that had scoured the country for years was not yet over. Ugaden died in battle against another Somali rival in 1996, and his son took over where his daddy had left off. Many were growing tired of the conflict, however. Movements for peace were gaining momentum, particularly in Somalia's north. In the city of Garowe, local leaders established the state of Puntland and provided for its inhabitants. In the south, the Islamic Courts Union, or ICU, instigated Sharia law and brought people together under a shared religion. This went against both the fledgling government forces and the powerful warlords. A traditional government was established in 2004, but it did not have widespread support and was disbanded after a massive brawl broke out during the parliamentary session. Into the vacuum stepped the ICU, but this frightened American strategists, and the CIA began funding the warlords the US military had just stopped fighting. The warlords, now flush with cash, formed the so-called Alliance for the Restoration of Peace and Counter-Terrorism. They took the fight to the ICU, battling the Islamists for control of Mogadishu for a second time. The CIA-backed warlords were crushed, but the respite allowed the transitional government, known as the TFG, to rearm. With massive Ethiopian support, they had pushed the forces of the ICU southwards, defeating and splintering them into sub-factions. One of these became the militant Islamist group Al-Shabaab, and they continue to battle the central government forces to this day. Peace still hasn't fully returned to Somalia, and poverty still racks the nation. For many, dreams of a greater Somalia hover just out of reach, while others look to the Islamic past for solutions to modern issues. With the climate shifting and Somalia becoming ever drier, the war may go on for years to come. But what do you think? Is the whole situation a result of the colonial borders? Would any of this happen without the killer drought? Why do you think the US forces massively underestimated IDID's militia? Let us know all that and more in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.